Julianne Williams, and I'm looking forward to spending time with you. Situations that involve conflict in our life are inevitable. Each of us has our own set of values and beliefs that drive our thoughts and behaviors. They don't always match those in our life, whether at work or at home. However, one of the keys to successful relationships is to know how to deal with those times when agreement or peace isn't present. Conflict can arise from little things, big things, or a building up of multiple interactions or conversations. In all cases, every relationship has two people and two sides. So what is conflict? Well, the dictionary says it's a condition where a person experiences a clash of opposing wishes or needs, or an incompatibility between two or more opinions. Why does conflict develop? Well, usually conflict centers around our individual desires and needs. It can begin when people have different goals and ideas about circumstances or relationships. We may also have different communication styles that inhibit communication from further We may also have different communication styles that inhibits communication further, interfering with the ability to get to the bottom of why there's a disagreement. We communicate with our words, but also with our body language. The majority of our communication is interpreted through our body language, so sometimes conflict starts and we don't even know why. Other factors that affect conflict Other factors that affect conflict are the level of danger someone may feel or the state of the relationship with another person. When I look back at some of my worst conflicts, I didn't feel safe or I didn't trust the person with whom I was upset. I felt I had to protect myself and my position because I didn't want to be vulnerable or get hurt. And conflict isn't fun. No one really likes it, no matter what they say. I can also look back at times when I avoided dealing with a situation because I didn't want to have a conflict. Clearly, none of this is healthy for us. The thing is, conflict doesn't have to be negative. It may not be easy, but it doesn't have to be negative. What are some of the feelings we have when we're experiencing conflict? Well, we all know that fight or flight response, and we know that conflict can cause a lot of stress, and we know what stress does to our body. We can actually develop health conditions due to stress from conflict, which is why it's really important to understand how to work through it. So some examples of things that happen if we're under stress from conflict is we can have anxiety, burnout, depression, digestive issues, hair loss, insomnia, and there's other things too, but those are the big ones. So you can see why learning to deal with conflict is important for us because we want to lead a healthy life. Now, changing our view on conflict is the first step to getting our arms around the concept that conflict can be healthy, and many times, believe it or not, it can strengthen a relationship. Changing our view on conflict is the first step. I already said that. Okay. What are some of the unhealthy ways of dealing with conflict? One way is to not acknowledge that there is actually a problem. Instead, we let our feelings fester and pretend they're not there. And some people say, like, we stuff our feelings. Another way is to be passive aggressive or hostile. Instead of investing in a conversation about what's wrong, we make snide comments or we pick a fight that has nothing to do with the issue that's really at the root of why we're upset. And I can tell you again, when I look back at difficult situations where there was a difference of opinion, I didn't always handle it well. And why? Well, we're really not taught how to deal with conflict. And as women, society's placed expectations on how we should behave. And I know I took some of those things to heart. Some reasons for me when I didn't want to approach conflict is that I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Or maybe I didn't feel safe enough to communicate for fear of losing the love or respect of the other person. Or I just didn't have the bandwidth to deal with the emotions. And you may have other reasons. exploring them is the first step to changing your mindset. Because there are ways to manage conflict without the mental picture that many of us have: yelling, screaming, hurtful words. And so today, to change that, I have a guest who is an expert in conflict resolution. He is going to talk with us about conflict at work and home, and some of the behaviors or steps we can take to resolve problems and have a positive outcome. Well, as I mentioned, we have a very special guest today, Brandon Bigelow from Fusion Conflict Strategies. And as we talked about earlier, it's really important for us to find ways to get through conflict so we can have healthy relationships. So welcome, Brandon.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And, Brandon and I have known each other a long time, and this is such a joy to have him share his expertise. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what your business does and what services you offer, and then let's talk a little bit about conflict.
Yes, let's jump right into it. So the name of the company is Fusion Conflict Strategies. And it was a couple of years ago as I was finishing a law program at Pepperdine that specifically focused on alternative dispute resolution that I started to get this idea. And the idea was harkening back to my many years as you have also experienced in healthcare administration, and all the conflict over the years that frankly we wanted to avoid, and all the problems that led to. So and as I finished the program and just thinking about what I wanted to do with it, and as I move forward in kind of a career transition after a quarter century, it was clear to me that one of my greatest regrets is that with everything else going on in healthcare operations, that I didn't take a step back and really hone in on one of the core principles that would have not only saved me a lot of grief and heartache in my own journey, but could have been more effective in allowing there to be continuity and just a feeling of goodwill and harmony in all the organizations that I was involved with. And it was during that special time where I was finishing that program and considering what I wanted to do, that it just became very apparent that, I'm going to make up for some lost time where I could have had a lot more peace and harmony in my life, and also just created organizations that were much more effective because we would address conflict early on and not allow it to fester and frankly just avoid it for months and years to come. And so that's been my passion. And so within the last couple of years, Fusion Conflict Strategies was formed specifically to address how companies don't reactively address conflict after it happens. And by that point, of course, Julianne, you've got attorneys who are involved. You've got suits, usually by employee to employer, and many other negative outcomes. But if we can address that and teach organizations how to address it early on, and not just have it be the executives of the company, but have that trickle down all the way through and permeate the entire agency, organization, or company, if we can do that effectively, we can not only avoid a lot of costs on the back end with litigation and those kind of things, but also just have a way more productive company that sees their ROI and their overall productivity just skyrocket. And so it's an exciting direction and time to be able to address this. Having looked back for so many years, and then now realizing, I'm not going to waste any more time just being reactive in a lot of regards, but really find ways to help companies address these issues before they become something that dictates their direction in not so great a way. So,
well, I love that. And because, like you said, we worked together for a lot of years and just known each other as colleagues as well. And we know that inherent in a workplace is conflict, but also inherent in our personal life is conflict. We have so many people that we deal with in our life. So at work, but then also at home. And even when we're dealing with people that we encounter in the public, sometimes we have conflict. And so if we think about having healthy relationships, there are going to be times when we don't see eye to eye or where we don't agree with someone. So maybe you could walk us through, what is conflict and why is it so important for us to recognize this dynamic in a relationship?
Yeah, so great questions. Conflict to me and kind of how we view it, not only me personally, but as our organization, is when usually two sides, sometimes it's multiple sides, but usually there's a couple of sides that they come to an impasse. Now, it could be a very aggressive kind of impasse. It could be a very minor kind of a disagreement. But anytime there's an impasse and an inability to be able to move forward in some regard, again, sometimes it's going to be very benign and less serious. And other times it can literally stop production in a company, or it can cause lots of other ill effects. So to me, it's that impasse, and it's that inability to be able to not only recognize when that impasse is met, but also how to sort of unravel and get unstuck from that point. And of course, the follow-up to that, as you asked, was, it's so critical that, and one of the things that we teach, and I love that you brought up in our personal lives as well, because I feel like that the principle is the same, whether in business or in our personal lives. One of the things that we teach, and I have to admit, I come from a large family, and as I know you have as well, and growing up, and we have 6 kids, and I wish I would have been focused a lot more on not only recognizing when there was a need to really become a lot more involved when those conflicts started to creep up, as opposed to teaching my kids about this is the best way from almost a textbook or a theoretical perspective on how to work with their friends, or how to get unstuck with relationships with each other and our family. And oftentimes, I hate to admit it, but oftentimes I missed opportunities by, and as we call it in our own company, in Fusion Conflict Strategies, we have a term that we use as we begin to work with clients. And I absolutely love it and endorse it, and not only in work, but also in my family. I've really started to this whole notion of infusion, right? Okay. So we know that about that term in healthcare, infusion therapy and all sorts of things. But in our business, but also I've just found that this is a principle in life that we can't theoretically teach how to for someone to get unstuck when it comes to conflict, or how to deal with it. We have to be willing to infuse ourselves personally in those situations. By not just teaching principles, but by a lot of listening, a lot of seeking to understand. As we know, in order to be understood, we have to first seek to understand. And so it's not only is it a core principle in my company that we're one of those groups. Consulting perhaps is kind of an archaic term. We much prefer to call ourselves coaches and members of these organizations. And we come in and we, as I said, we infuse ourselves into the organization, as opposed to a quick assessment with a clipboard. Here's the recommendations. We'll see you in a few months if you need us. Right. And so, as it relates to family situations and personal relationships, becoming much more involved at a for the lack of a better term, at a granular level, and resolve and understanding and resolving issues. And so, for me, and personal and in business, best way to resolve those things are, to get in front of them at the ground level, and that way the solutions and the ideas that we provide are so much more effective, because we've lived what they've lived, and we've seen exactly through our own eyes what they're experiencing.
So the thing about conflict is, we experience conflict, like I said, in every area of our life. And one thing I've noticed is that I don't avoid conflict like I used to. I've gotten a lot better as I've gotten older, but there are some things that happen inside you when you are getting ready to have a conversation that's difficult. And so sometimes all of those feelings stop us from actually expressing what is happening between two people. So if I'm upset with my child, my husband, my sibling, I don't necessarily want to go and hurt their feelings, but I also feel nervous and upset. What are some of the feelings that people have when they get involved in conflict? And then maybe we can talk about, how do we work through those emotions so that we can have a conversation that is productive and is, we use maybe I statements instead of you, or whatever it is. You're our expert, but let's talk about that for a minute. Why is it that we avoid conflict, and what does it feel like?
Yeah, great question. And obviously, it's something that we all deal with in so many aspects of our lives. And so, there's some core reasons why I think all of us, to a certain extent. Now it may vary with some individuals. I would say on a continuum. Sometimes it's as benign as pure procrastination. Like, okay, of my many list of things that I don't want to do, I'm going to put that in the very end of the spectrum, right? So sometimes it's not so much a fear of dealing with it. It's just it's not high on my priority. And I would say that's on the sort of mild end of the spectrum. On the extreme side, which I think is more common to most of us.
Mhm.
Now, within the fear side of this, and the unwillingness to want to deal with it,
Mhm.
there's probably different variations of that. But on the extreme side of why we avoid is because we're afraid of where it will lead to. We're afraid that we either will be shown to be incorrect or wrong in that situation. Sometimes we hold so dearly, and I'm afraid that I'm guilty as anybody sometimes of having notions or ideas that come in conflict with others, and instead of the ability to be able to say, all right, I'm gonna put that aside. I'm gonna, even if I 100% don't agree with where this other person is coming from,
Mhm.
the ability to be able to compartmentalize those and say, just for a minute or just for a day or for a few weeks while we're dealing with this, I'm going to put this to the side and compartmentalize it and just pretend like it's not there, even if I still hold fast that those issues are there, that I disagree with somebody or a company or whoever I'm dealing with. And then the humility and the ability to be able to meet them where they are in the middle. Now, what's going to happen sometimes is, of course, that sometimes people don't want to meet you there. In fact, I've had many times, as I'm sure you have, Julianne, where you feel really good about, man, I humble myself. I feel really good, even though I know now this is the thought that sometimes we have. I'm not necessarily proud that I've had this thought, but sometimes we say, I still know they're 1,000% wrong, but I'm going to show, my graciousness, my how magnanimous I am in the situation by meeting them in the middle, and that will sway them to my side, and at least will start to pull them towards where I am at. Now, as I described that, the flaw is obvious.
Right.
The purpose, the intent of that was great, compartmentalizing, but we as we look at that, there's really no way to view that other than that. If we're only going to compartmentalize it only to say that person is wrong and they need to meet me halfway, what we're actually saying is I'm never really going to get fully either to their side or understand where they're at. That's more what we call in the field manipulation, right? It's conflict manipulation. So that the intent of that is good. We do want to meet in the middle. We just need to. I just want to make it very clear that we don't want to do it in a manipulative way. If we're going to meet them in the middle and compartmentalize, we need to truly believe that there is the ability for us to change, right?
Okay, now you just made me think of something.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got, and you do too, these younger kids.
Yes.
And I mean, you have them younger, but mine 25 and 21. Okay, the term gaslighting, because that's like when I hear it, you're saying like this manipulation. So is gaslighting and manipulation, are those the same thing? Are they different? Do they even fit in the whole conflict? Just because I hear it all the time, and maybe those of you who have children like me in their 20s, you hear that whole gaslighting thing, which I had never heard before. That's a new term in the last year or two that I've learned, and I really didn't understand it. And so then I think of conflict, and a lot of times it comes with a conversation, and it's like, you're not hearing me, you're not listening to me, don't gaslight me. And it's like, okay, so
yeah. No, as I understand, again, you and I are in the same generation, and so it wasn't a term I used growing up. But I've since heard. My understanding of it is it's sort of an effort to draw attention to somebody in a negative way to show that their way of thinking is vastly different than yours.
Okay.
Is that your understanding of it as well?
I thought of it. I mean, and then here's the problem, right? I don't know. My understanding is probably incorrect. I sort of even got this idea that it's like, you are going to make me look bad so you look good.
Right.
Right. But and manipulate the facts and not really meet me where I am, not really listen to understand, opposed to listen to respond.
Right, exactly. And I think that's a wonderful way of looking at it, because in the end, it all, just like the example I used earlier, if sometimes we want to meet someone in the middle, and yet we do it for very selfish purposes, to pull them all the way over instead of like, and this is one of the things we teach companies is one of the exercises that we go through when we do the initial intake assessment is, if a company or an executive or anyone in an organization doesn't have the willingness or the ability to be able to put everything that they've believed as far as the best ways to resolve conflict, if they're not willing to put that to the side and truly understand the ways to do it. Now, we're not saying that by our any sort of theory based or hand them a textbook and say, now understand it. Every situation is different. We address, and our recommendations as we coach these teams, it's always going to be different, but the principles are always the same. And one of those core principles is the ability to be able to compartmentalize
Mhm.
for the right reasons, for truly altruistic purposes, and to be able to compartmentalize at least for a time. And if you find that the person or the organization or whoever that you're working with has some things that you didn't realize, or maybe some better ways to truly have common understanding, then have the ability to take that compartment that you put to the side and unpack some things that have been pulling you back for such a period of time. So that's one of the core things that we teach, and it's by far the most difficult part of the process with fusion conflict strategies is those initial first few meetings, as far as like all the notions and the ideas, because as we know with lots of things in life, we we hold dear to things and traditions and ideas, many of which are wonderful, and I love traditions. I know that you and your family are so much into traditions, and as is mine, and so those things are positive. But in terms of those things that hold us back from being able to solve the most critical element of our family relationships and of our business relationships, is the ability to be able to meet someone where they're at, and to be able to look at conflict in a way positive. We don't run away from the fire. In essence, the conflict is a burning, raging inferno. But we train organizations, and I think I've tried to practice what I preach in my own family. When those issues crop up, I'm sprinting towards that fire, because it is only through those difficult conversations that we're beginning, and having the ability to be able to meet someone where they're at, when miracles happen. And until those light bulb moments happen, those processes just simply aren't possible.
So so the first principle is that we compartmentalize. So we take our emotions, our feelings, our way, and we say, let me put this here so that I can really listen to you and learn where you're coming from. Okay, so then what's the step after that? What do I do after I've listened to you? I may or may not agree still, but I want to find a way for us to not be in conflict. What comes next?
Right. So great question. Because as I said, it's a battle in the very beginning.
Yeah.
And it's when emotions are so high, there's oftentimes a unwillingness and frankly, sometimes an inability to be able to go to the next step. And the next step is very difficult, because the next step involves a lot of, the ability to be able to stop talking and actually start listening, right? So first you have to recognize, I'm willing to be able to meet someone halfway when conflict, even if I think they're 1,000% wrong. The ability to be able to say, I'm going to actually meet them halfway. After that point, and we teach companies this, and not just executives, but it's trickled down throughout teams, is we train them how to get out of that mindset, get unstuck from throwing opinions and mindsets and traditions in to prove your point, right? And having an open environment. And so there's way more to the process than we have time for today. But it involves bringing together people in initially like a boardroom meeting, or whatever large area that we can get the entire organization into. And this is just an example of how we do it with companies. And then once we start talking about some things that we do to teach them better listening skills, then we break off into groups, and we practice. We do a lot of role plays, and not just role plays theory based. I mean, we find out from them what are the most difficult kinds of issues, conversations, conflicts that you deal with in your company, right? And then me and my team, we're writing all this down upon an initial big group meeting. And then after that, we break off into groups, and we use real issues that they're having in the organization. And there's some work, and there's to say that there's blood, sweat, and tears is an understatement, because it's a very emotional process. Because again, if we pulled theory-based and just sort of fanciful kinds of things that they'll never deal with, it doesn't have the same impact. But additionally, I haven't even really talked about it, but a lot of, when we go into any company, we've done our homework, and we talk to the executives, and we know what the most critical issues, at least according to them, are.
Right.
What's amazing, Julianne, is the sometimes disconnect between what management, and I would say, look, we can take it into our own lives, what parents.
Yes. I would say, so break that down from a personal thing, because I think that's the problem, right? This is where the conflict starts, right? Which is, I think this and you think that, and they're so far apart.
Right. Exactly. Right. And so the principles are the same, whether in our home or whether in the boardroom. So we over a series of days and weeks and months, and sometimes companies want to sort of try it out first with kind of a trial basis for a few weeks or maybe just for a couple of sessions. But however long or short that we were able to work with companies, they have a series of things that so after they are willing to sort of unpack their notions and all the traditions and things, that be willing to come to the table, and then they get better and better at listening through a series of not just things that while we're there, but we give them homework assignments after we're gone. But they are responsible each day to not only have, so at the very end of each day, they meet with their manager. So they have a group meeting, and then they break off into individual meetings. Now it's a very involved process, as you can tell.
Yeah.
And if a company, again, I keep going back between families and companies, there's ways very differently as family, just because of the dynamics. But just giving the example of companies, it is an investment of time that is, it's a very serious investment of time. Yeah. And it's because it's very difficult to unpack all of these things in a couple of sessions. So at the very end of each day, over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, every single day, Monday through Friday, there is a direct meeting between the groups that the individual employee works most closely with, and the manager who's responsible. And then there's time allotted after that for the manager to meet individually. So they talk about group success and they talk about individual success. And then every Friday of every week, the entire company gets together and they talk about what they've learned, specifically about how they themselves have been part of the problem in the past, a big part of the problem in the past, of how conflict was not able to be resolved, and what their commitment was at the end of each week to move forward. And the great thing is to see the evolution after week 1 and week 2 and week 3. So as I become a lot more familiar with these concepts, with increased education and just experience in helping companies and individuals, it's really funny. I've started to think about ways in which I can use this in my own home, right?
Yes.
Now it's not nearly as formal, but I've certainly, and I'm not saying that I've become the greatest listener ever, but I've certainly tried much more deeply to be a much better listener. And also to have more of an organized way in which, when there's complaints and we just can't seem to get unstuck from certain things, to find opportunities for my kids to be able to come up with solutions. And that's the whole essence of our program. Is, you notice those meetings, it was the employees who were the ones coming up with these plans. It wasn't executives. It's not our team. And that whole notion of infusion that I talked about earlier, that's really the essence of that. We don't just come and drop information and we walk away. We infuse ourselves into the organization, and we're there, we're shadowing. And even when we're not there, we have virtual meetings. And I know a lot of consultants and coaching groups do this, but we truly believe that conflict is one of those unique things where, unless we're willing to literally live in the shoes and the lives of those individuals, and even if we're not there, to remotely be very involved, it's just never going to get off the ground and not be successful as it should be.
So in terms of conflict resolution, so the first thing is we compartmentalize. The second thing is we take and put aside traditions and other preconceived notions that we're used to, things that it's always been like that. This is how we do it in this family. This is how we do it at this company. But we have to take those out. Then we have to listen to meet the person where they are.
Correct.
Because first we have to take those things and say, I'm just going to listen for where they are, not for all the things I think.
Right.
Then what comes next?
And this really involves the plans that individuals. Now, again, I'm talking about company based, right? But this could trickle down to our families,
that's why you're saying that, and then what I'm trying to do is sort of like say, okay, so as a person, how do I work this into my life?
Right. And so what we teach, and again, the principles are the same no matter what who we're talking about, is a conviction and a willingness to be able to come back to the well often. So what we've learned and what we've taught, what we've trained, it can't be in a vacuum and not be practiced, right? So now let's just take it to the example of a family member, right? So let's just say that as whoever's in charge in that home, we realize nowadays sometimes it's mother or father, sometimes it's two mothers, or it's a single parent home, or whatever the case is. They play a critical role in ensuring that, and again, if we take this on an informal basis, like in families,
Yeah.
what I just described in a very formal basis could be done very easily in, at the dinner table, right?
Right.
Talking about those, hey, what, I just want to, maybe a mother to a daughter or to a son. Hey, I just want to, Ashley, I just wanted to let you know, I realize I've thought about things in the past, maybe, and I've had ideas that maybe don't always agree with you and the way that you approach things. I realize we're also a different generation. I want to get unstuck from why it seems like we're always in conflict. And I know that I'm a huge part of that solution. So what I want to do a better job of is being like so much slower to correct and be so much quicker to listen and to really know where you're coming from. And I also would love if you would let me know from your perspective how I can assist you with that, right? And really help understand you better. And if I'm mistaken as I'm describing to you, your point of view, please let me know. And then after there's a commitment to unpacking ideas that we've stuck to in traditions, a commitment to listening. And now we're not probably going to be doing role plays in our homes.
Right. And I'm assuming that you so I like this direct conversation that says, look, we're not getting along right now. And I recognize that. And I want to be part of the solution. Now, do you also say, let's establish some ground rules? Like, we're not going to yell. We're not going to raise our voice. We're not going to use, or does that come later? Because, because I think, obviously I have 2 kids, and it's as much as I think I'm a real good mom. Yeah. I'm sure I've not been perfect, and I find that hard to believe. By the way, thank you very much. I'm glad, but we've had conflict, and there have been times where obviously I've lost my temper, they've lost their temper, right. So I think we're in a place now. We're all a little bit older, but where it is like we're not going to yell at each other. Right. We do have these ground rules now that it's much more productive. It took us time to figure some of these things out, not just on yelling, but just to figure out how we do interact. But it has been some of that statement you said was I don't want to fight anymore. Right. I want us to find a common ground because this is not a healthy way for us to manage our relationship.
Yes. And what you brought up is a perfect point. I was going to echo that is, yes, I think there's nothing wrong with ground rules because even though one regard they may seem rigid, like, is my mother or my father dictating to me exactly how this is going to go? No, it actually, if anything, it projects ahead of time that, hey, I promise I'm not gonna jump right on you. I'm not gonna assume anything, and I'm certainly not gonna be. I'm gonna let you listen. I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna allow you to be able to express all your frustrations and your feelings. So that I 100% agree. And then, but the consistency to be able to return to that well, as I was saying, there needs to be some consistency in families and in business. Unless this is practiced, and I know it's probably way less structured in most families. I don't know many families that say, hey, we're gonna have a role play tonight. Yeah. But that same if we're gonna go back to the dinner table and I know not everyone eats at the dinner table. In my house, it's usually on Sundays we have a dinner table. Yeah. Oftentimes we're in front of the television or the TV's off, but we're all eating in the family room. Wherever that is, that there is some consistency and an invitation to say, hey, this has been so wonderful. I would love if we could meet, once a week and just like this at dinner. And that's the thing. If it becomes in the eyes of most children and certainly teenagers, if there is something that's rote and it's scripted and it's very rigid, there's an unwillingness to do it. But to be able to in those light bulb moments that you can sense that they're having, but probably your children, but they're probably not admitting to you, seize on those moments because it's the rare child who's like, Mom or Dad, you're so right. At least in my house, probably yours. You did a great job. With your kids.
I didn't. I don't know I don't know if I've ever been told I'm correct.
Yeah.
No, actually, my daughter, Cassie, she would tell you. She actually, it's so funny. She told me recently. She's like, I do call you now about everything adult. And I'm like, oh, good. I finally have some credibility. So it just takes time.
Yeah, like peer to peer, all of a sudden, right?
Yeah, she's adult.
But the great thing is you can make it very unstructured.
Yes.
But also in those moments where you recognize that there is maybe a slight light bulb going off on top of their heads, that you can say, this has been so great. I don't know about you, but I've loved this. And would you mind, Cassidy or Connor or whoever, like, would you mind if we just have this conversation again next week and just check in? And as long as we can give certainly to our children, and not an assignment where they think they're in trouble, but we humble ourselves and say,
Mhm.
I want to be accountable, and I want to let you know, and I want you to let me know when these commitments that we're talking about and how I can better approach when I don't understand something, how I'm improving, and I need your help. I need your help to be able to identify that. And here's a child who's 12 or 14 or 16 going, wait, I'm part of the solution. I mean, what amazing things could happen if we, at least in many ways, created that environment. But the consistency needs to be there, and every family has to find their own sort of perfect. Maybe perfect's not the right word,
Yeah.
but their own way in which they can facilitate that. Right?
Yeah.
Could be the dinner table. Could be, when they're watching. My house, my wife and daughters love the show The Bachelor. Right?
Oh,
So they're from the part of Bachelor Nation, right? So
oh boy.
So they're all
I would have not
together.
predicted that, by the way. That's kind of funny.
Well, they're definitely a full-fledged members of Bachelor Nation. So that's the thing that brings them together. So whatever situation, but it is funny because I've noticed that when they're all together, and it happens at the dinner table too, but they do find not just time to watch something together, but during commercials, especially, even with DVR. Sometimes they're tempted to forward it, but they're like, "Oh, we're taking a break for a moment. Let's talk." I had a question, and they're just talking about things. So every family has to find that balance. So again, as we go back and we kind of summarize, as you did it so eloquently earlier, it's that unpacking the traditions and the customs and those things that we've always held sort of tribal to us, and we've held in. It's the humility to be able to truly meet someone in the middle and have that commitment. It's the ability then, the third step is to be able to listen, to be able to not just say we're listening, but even test yourself. Like, okay, when you start listening, commit to yourself, like, okay, in my mind, after 30 seconds, I'm going to start telling myself exactly what they've said. How many times we met somebody and we can't even remember their name, right?
Right.
Or you meet a group of people, right? So it's an art and a science, I know, but especially as it relates to this, which is so critical in companies and in families, to become a better listener, we have to literally every time we do it. Now, like, 21 days, something becomes a habit. Right. I think over time, we will naturally get much better at, like, as soon as it's like we plug in the light, as soon as we start talking to someone, and we just listen, right? And we constantly tell ourselves, we're not going to interject. We're going to allow them to get all the way through all of their objections and their issues and challenges. So it's, again, unpacking, meeting them in the middle, dropping all of those notions and finding that humility. And then consistency, after listening and be able to understand what all the issues are, finding time on a routine basis. And of course, with our kids, without making them think that it's rote and it's routine, and then it's an assignment that we're expected to follow up on, right? And every family will do that differently. But in companies where it's more structured and there's more expectations in terms of like these routine meetings, it's very easy to facilitate. But it does take work. And Julian, I just have to say that, if we could root out conflict, or at least come very close, because even though the name of my company is Fusion Conflict Strategies, as the last name or last word in that title suggests, they're strategies, right? They're not guarantees that every single conflict is going to be resolved, but it gives organizations the best opportunity, in my estimation, to be able to, and whether it's our approach or really any approach that choose, if it's not focused on and it doesn't become the most important part of any organization or family or personal relationship. So how many times in our lives have we had a relationship that's gone sour? Oh my gosh, just the absolute best way for me to look at it is, we get so complicated with large companies and working with them. And we've already, in the short history of my company, we've been working with some larger clients, and it can get daunting when you're very first going in and going, oh my gosh, I thought there were 2 or 3 levels and there's 14. And how do we bring all these people together and work separately? But if you just take it down to mano with any of us, we've all in life had a relationship that started out wonderful, and at some point it soured, and some point it more than soured, it became toxic, right? And I mean, to be able to reconcile, and now it doesn't always happen where it's a full reconciliation. Sometimes there's forms of that. Sometimes even just the ability to be able to shake their hand or even hug them, but knowing that you're not going to have a deep-seated relationship, that's still a victory, right? Yeah. But how much greater, is there any greater feeling in this world than a relationship that was toxic? And you can have, this goes right back to unpacking all of those notions that we have. Yeah. We can tell ourselves, we can tell our family, we can tell everyone who wants to listen how terrible this person is. But haven't you noticed the minute that issue is resolved, all of that goes out the window, and we struggle to remember what those issues were, it all melts away.
Mhm.
And the magic of those intimate moments when that happens,
Mhm.
there's nothing in the world like that. And our message to our companies that we work with, our message to families, to any individuals that we work with, but certainly the message I take away from what I do every day is that magic exists, and it doesn't just exist with those beautiful relationships that are rekindled and renewed. It can also happen in organizations to where it's not just ROI and productivity and net income. It creates this beautiful harmony that makes people want to get up in the morning and come to work in ways that they never imagined.
Right.
And as you know, that's not a stretch.
No.
That is what brings. It's not the dollars, the number of zeros on a paycheck that gets that person excited to get there in the morning. If you can create a harmony in families, certainly we're much happier in those relationships. If you can do it in a company, it completely changes the whole feeling of that organization.
Well, and the truth is, we're the same person everywhere. So we're the same person at home, we're the same person at work. And so everything bleeds. There's no such thing as work-life balance, as far as I'm concerned. There's also no separation. And so I think when we recognize that we carry every part of our life into the other part of our life, then when we get to where we have healthy relationships at home, we can have healthy relationships at work and vice versa. And then we're happier all the way around, because when we're not happy at work and we go home, we take it with us, and usually our family suffers.
Right. So right. And just, as it relates to empowerment, I know that's, as long as I've known you, Julianne, empowerment, women's empowerment, but just empowerment for individuals, especially those who, the downtrodden, those who are down on their luck and who have had to fight incredible fights. I know that you've always been a champion for them. And I think about, we all studied in college Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Yes.
And at the very top of that pyramid is the self-actualization. I truly do believe that as we talk about empowerment, that the only way we all want to figure out ways, and conflict is such a big part of this, but we all want to figure out ways how to become empowered in whatever we're seeking, right? We're also trying to find ways around conflict, right? And in the end, these things are very common, and they relate so well together because conflict, you can't avoid it. I know that in our minds, we tell ourselves that. Empowerment, in order to become truly, as you well know, in order to become empowered, it's a struggle. You have to get into the middle of whatever battle is being raged against you, against your families, against your company, whatever. And so empowerment doesn't come from a textbook and the number of degrees that you have after your name, nor does conflict, right? Or resolving conflict, or overcoming it. It truly, the essence of it, and how do we get, Maslow was a pretty smart guy, right? Yes. And all those other things have to happen in order to do that. And I think the food and shelter and all the way up that pyramid, there's a lot of struggle, right? The self-actualization only happens, and ultimately the empowerment or the self-actualization, as I'm kind of making it analogous to one another, only comes through not only the journey, but that addressing conflict over and over and over again. And I don't know in this life that we ever 100% master it, but we can become really, really good at it. And as you said, that well-balanced, I totally agree that work-life balance, I don't know if anyone who's ever truly achieved that. I don't know if it's a real thing, but I do know that happiness and contentment, and yes, I'll even use the word peace for the lack of a better term, although that's a wonderful term, peace and joy in our lives really starts with resolving relationships, resolving conflict, and then that's where empowerment ultimately comes from. And it has to be us in the trenches doing the work. And as I was thinking about before we met today, how similar empowerment was to conflict, they're not mutually exclusive. Right. In order to get empowerment, you have to meet conflict head on.
You do.
And you have to not just say, here's how you solve it, I'm going to take a break. It has to be you involved with, because you think of the most powerful people ever, right? And we can go from Christianity all the way through business leaders who we've admired, or everyone in between, right? Civic leaders and so forth. And what do they have in common? They all dealt with something almost superhuman, something they had to overcome, and they all did it in a way that we all admire, right? And conflict was a critical component all along the way in that process. And they were masters at overcoming that and ultimately becoming empowered.
Well, and the thing about conflict, when you resolve conflict, it's also a way of forgiveness. Because
So true.
when you decide that, we're not going to be in conflict anymore, that means I really am putting aside things about how I feel, but really I'm just letting go of things that limit me. So if for any other reason you don't get good at conflict, do it for you. Because when you are able to resolve things that are difficult, things that bring drama, things that bring all those negative emotions, when you resolve those, you actually put yourself in a place of power. And you also put yourself in a place of peace. And forgiveness sometimes is part of conflict resolution. And sometimes actually it's forgiving yourself. So
Beautifully said.
right?
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
All right. So just Brandon Bigelow I'm so grateful for him coming today and sharing with us his expertise. He did get an advanced degree in this, and I was so excited because he was good at it before. He's not saying that, but he was good at it before. It's something that comes very natural to him, but it doesn't come natural to all of us. And the truth is, none of us like conflict. Even if we're good at it, we generally don't like it. But it is something in our life that we are going to confront. And we're going to have to find a way to get through that if we want to get to the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is self-actualization. If it's really possible. I don't know, is it?
You need to remember your psychology class.
I know, thank goodness I didn't get a degree in that. Woo!
Yes.
Woo! But it's really important. And so I just thought it'd be great today to have Brandon's expertise come to us, because as we learn to deal with difficult situations, we then become a better version of us.
Thank you very much, Julianne.
Thank you.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Wow. I loved thinking about a few simple steps we can take in any area of our life to knock the drama right out of it. It also gave me a lot to think about in terms of my values, traditions, and habits, and how that could affect my ability to be open-minded and to listen, to hear what is being said. Putting those feelings aside to investigate what the other person needs, wants, or believes to come to a better place, not just what I have inside of me. I also realize that sometimes we may have to agree to disagree, and there's no reason why not having total agreement on every aspect has to be a deal breaker for finding a solution that can bring peace to a relationship. After all, as I've grown older, I have become all the more aware that people in your life is where you derive joy. That's what's most important. And having peaceful relationships in all areas of my life creates a place that allows me to live my best life. So today, I hope this conversation has given you some tools to enhance your relationships. Thank you for spending time with me. I'll see you on the next episode. Let's journey together.